I woke up this morning and saw that the hashtag #LoveAMuslim was trending. Quick question. Why do we need to be reminded to love a Muslim? Reporters don't remind us to love a Hindu or to love a Buddhist or to love a Jew or to love an atheist, and they wouldn't dream of reminding us to love a Christian. So why are we told to love a Muslim? The reason we need to be constantly reminded to love a Muslim is the same reason we need to be constantly reminded that Islam is a religion of peace. Jihadis are launching endless terrorist attacks in the name of Allah. They're kidnapping girls in places like Nigeria. We've got Islamic rape gangs preying upon children in the UK and elsewhere. 18 of the 20 worst countries in the world in terms of the treatment of women are Muslim-majority countries. Then there's the killing of apostates and homosexuals, throwing people in prison for blasphemy or for preaching another religion, persecuting religious minorities, female genital mutilation, slavery, and so on. And our Muslim friends are quick to point out that Islam is the world's fastest growing religion, which means that the terrorist attacks and the kidnappings and the sexual abuse and the killings and the imprisonments and the persecutions and the mutilations are only going to get worse. Oddly enough, some people are concerned about this. But they're not allowed to be concerned because, as we all know, it's racist and Islamophobic to be concerned about terrorism and rape and human rights abuses. So the people who are concerned have to be called racists and bigots and hate mongers and Islamophobes. After being called racists and bigots and hate mongers and Islamophobes whenever they voice their concerns about Islam, these people conclude, very quickly, that it's pointless to try to have an open, honest discussion about Islam because they realize that the opposing side will just shout them down and hurl insults at them. Nothing amplifies frustration like being worried about your children and your friends and your rights, and your country, and the future of the world, and being told to shut up about it. But that's what happens all day, every day. So the frustration is building on an epic global scale. And this is why I see people in the comments section of YouTube saying things like, real simple, kill all Muslims, and all religion is rubbish, but Muslims are an infestation, like rats in your dustbin. The growing frustration could even lead to open calls for a special day of attacks against Muslims, like today's Punish a Muslim campaign. I say that the frustration could lead to something like this because I'm not convinced that these letters were sent out by radical anti-Muslim bigots. I've seen so many so-called anti-Muslim hate crimes that later turned out to be hoaxes by Muslims trying to stir up sympathy for Islam that I find it difficult to take letters like this seriously, especially when all the letters actually do is stir up sympathy for Islam. But I've also seen enough people calling for violence against Muslims in the comments section of YouTube that it wouldn't surprise me if someone actually tried to start a points system for attacking Muslims. So, for the sake of argument, let's pretend that we have some sort of good reason to think that this letter is real. Looking at the letter, we see 10 points for verbally abusing a Muslim, 25 points for pulling the headscarf off a Muslim woman, 50 points for throwing acid in the face of a Muslim, all the way down to 2,500 points for nuking Mecca. Even though this threat is from the UK, authorities here in the US are taking the threat seriously. So we read, Punish a Muslim Day. New York braces for viral anti-Muslim violence campaign. Yes, New York, the most intolerant place on earth, the city where you can kill thousands of people in the name of your ideology, and the citizens will praise your ideology even more. Let's all brace ourselves for such intolerance. The world responded to the threat with Love a Muslim Day. Now, let's be serious for a moment. Do the organizers of Love a Muslim Day really think that if someone hates Muslims and wants to nuke Mecca, his mind is going to change because of a hashtag? Of course not. The real purpose is to yet again shut down open, honest discussions about Islam. If we think that there are all these bigots waiting in the shadows, ready to start killing Muslims, we're going to be awfully suspicious of people who are criticizing Islam. But there are two problems here. First, most people who criticize Islam don't criticize it because they're filled with hate. They criticize it because they're filled with love. They love something that Islam threatens to destroy, so they protect what they love by responding to the threat. Parents love their children. So when they find out that there's an ideology that calls for the violent subjugation of their children, they want to protect their children. Not because they hate something, but because they love something. People love their families, their friends, their freedoms, their churches, their synagogues. So when an ideology comes along that threatens their families, their friends, their freedoms, their churches, and their synagogues, not only is it thoroughly rational to be concerned, I think it would be irrational not to be concerned. Second, I agree completely that we should love Muslims. There are people who challenge Islam because they hate Muslims, but there are also people who challenge Islam because they love Muslims. Many Muslim organizations and politicians and media personalities try to lump all the critics together as haters. But it makes perfect sense to criticize Islam if you love Muslims. In fact, if you really love Muslims, I don't see how you can avoid challenging Islam. Muslims are taught that the only way to please God is to live and think and walk and talk and eat and sleep and go to the bathroom like a 7th century Arab. If you just thought to yourself, no, they're not, guess what? You don't understand Islam. And their confidence in Islam is built upon a foundation of absolute lies. If you ask a Muslim, why do you believe in the Quran? He'll say something like, because the Quran has been perfectly preserved, which is a miracle. Not only would it not be a miracle for a book to be perfectly preserved, it's completely, utterly, totally false to say that the Quran has been perfectly preserved. According to Muslim sources, entire chapters were lost, large passages were lost, verses that were revealed as part of the Quran were eaten by a sheep, and those verses are not in the Quran today. And yet, Muslim leaders lie to their followers in order to give them a false confidence in the most obvious false prophet in history. I love Muslims, so I don't want them to think that they're serving God by imitating Muhammad. When their leaders lie to them, I want them to learn the truth so that they can make an informed decision. But politicians and reporters and actors and educators are convinced that the only way to love Muslims is to keep them in a state of ignorance and deception, to keep them from ever hearing any challenges to the nonsense that they've been taught, to keep them in bondage to an ideology that oppresses them. Is it loving to treat Muslims like perpetual children at best or as subhuman animals at worst? No, it's not. But that's how politicians and reporters and actors and educators treat them. Don't criticize their views. Well, why not? We criticize everyone else's views. But Muslims aren't like the rest of us. They can't deal with criticism or cartoons without killing people. Guess what? They can deal with criticism. And they will deal with criticism. Because there are people like me who love them enough to tell them the truth, to tell them that they've been lied to, and to encourage them to think critically about what they've been taught. If you love Muslims, join me. If you despise Muslims, just get out of the way, because there's a train coming through. A love train, a relentless love train that won't be stopped, that can't be stopped until every Muslim in the world has heard some very important truths that have been kept from them all their lives. All aboard.